How much did I make as a World Cup downhill and enduro racer? Well, finally we're going to let out the big secret. Alright, so I've had this idea for this video for a long time to finally come out and say what I actually made as a World Cup downhill and enduro racer. As most contracts keep everything secret, it's not a very common thing to see, and I take quite a lot of interest in other sports, like learning how much people earn in different sports and what they get from certain sponsors and so on. There was a really good surfing show, How Surfers Get Paid. I really enjoyed that, to see how their pay structure works and what money they were getting from all different sponsors and what athletes got paid what. So finally I'm gonna say what I got paid myself over my career and go through year by year and basically tell all, because mainly I rode for GT for 10 years and that brand doesn't exist anymore. So my contracts are not really existing anymore from them. And I'm not a complete racer anymore. I'm more of an ambassador, I would say. I could say influencer, but I try to avoid that word. I don't have influenza yet. So yeah, I'm an ambassador. I'm not a full-time racer anymore. So this is how much I made as a downhill and enduro World Cup racer. The first year I raced in Europe, I didn't actually get the chance to race as a junior. I started in 2008. I was already an elite rider. I couldn't afford to go as a junior. I had to move to Australia to work for a couple of years before I could really afford the trip to Europe. Even just the travel over there was, I think it was 2,500 New Zealand dollars or 3,000 for flights. And I think I had a budget of 11,000 New Zealand dollars, which is not much in the grand scheme of things, but that's what I saved up over the time, including buying a used Iron Horse Sunday. And then I flew to Europe. And I didn't know anyone. I just flew over there by myself. I didn't have a van, I didn't have anything, and I tried to make it happen for myself. I knew one person. So I flew to Portugal, met that guy, stayed at his house. He took me to the race. Shout out to Bruno. He took me to the race. Then I met Alex Evans, who took me to some other races, and so on and so forth. That was the way to do it cheap. I had 11,000 as my budget, and I managed to get some top 30 World Cup results on that budget, which worked out well in my favor and got me noticed. I guess my antics on and off the bike, and people I noticed that I was traveling around like that and probably were envious of what's going on. So they asked the question, and I had to meet everyone as well. The best thing in that first year was that I had no support, so I had to suddenly go and meet everyone. In one season I knew most of the people in the industry. So that first year I actually made no money. I spent 11,000 and I bought my Iron Horse Sunday for 4,000, so about 15,000 New Zealand dollars. Not much in today's money, but it probably a bit of inflation over the time. It might have been a bit more now. So that was my budget. That's how I did it the first year. And that got me noticed by Ancelotti, an Italian brand, for the second year. Ancelotti, I got chatting to Tommaso Ancelotti, the son. It's a father-son business, Italian boutique bicycles, I would say. They make them in their garage, and they're pretty trick bikes. I didn't know too much at the time, but managed to get onto their little team. Myself and Brooke McDonald got moved to a tiny town in Tuscany, up in the mountains. Moved there for the season. We could live there for the season in Doganaccia, and they looked after us as if we were family, but we didn't actually get paid. We didn't get to keep our bikes. We just got supported at all the races. So all I had to pay for that year was getting over there and getting back. And I remember I went to an urban downhill race in Bergamo, and it was an urban 4-cross race, I think. So I knew that I had to go there to try and win the prize money so that I could go to Mont Saint Anne and Bromont at the end of the year. So I think I made it all the way to the final, and I snapped my chain in the start in the final. So I got second, and I managed to get 1,200 euros, which I then put in my shoe and traveled back on the train. So I didn't get robbed, because 1,200 euros to me at the time was probably like $1 million now. that was my budget for getting to Monson and Bromont. It paid for all of that. So yeah, those were the things I had to do. But in that season, I made no money. Apart from prize money, we made a little bit of prize money at some of the races, so we could take that home. We slept in the camper van with Tommaso, and he took us to all the races, and that really gave us a springboard for our careers. Both myself and Brooke, 100%, that was the springboard. And without that, we wouldn't be where we are today, but that small opportunity allowed us the chance to show what we could do in Europe and then move on to the next year and onto another team. So yeah, shout out to Tommaso and Alberto. On to 2010, I rode for Kenda Playbiker. They were another Italian team, so I lived in Aosta, in the Aosta Valley, and I would ride up on the mountain at Pila pretty much every day. That team was run by Romano, an Italian. Most people would know Romano Favino, most people in the scene anyway. And then I got to keep my four-cross bike and my downhill bike. So I got 2 bikes out of that season, so I could sell those at the end of the season, but I didn't get paid. But they paid all of my expenses. As I would just pay for food when I was in Aosta. So essentially then I just made the profit of the 2 bikes, which wasn't a crazy amount, but was quite good at the time. And then had some good results actually. I qualified 5th in Champery, which was my highlight for the season. Won some Italian races and had a pretty good year actually. Enjoyed it, had fun in Aosta. And training at Pila was pretty epic, good spot for it. So that was a good year. Then on to 2011, what could have been a great year for me. I finally signed for like a big team, MS Racing, and they were MS Evil at the time. Now they're MS Zeroed on the World Cup, and they've been a multitude of different bike brands supporting them. I think I had quite a good contract that year. I think it was 12,000 euros, but that was to include some expenses as well. But 12,000 euros converted to New Zealand dollars was quite a good amount, so I was pretty happy with that. Unfortunately, in the pre-season, I broke my arm, and the bone came out of the skin, then went back in the arm, so it got infected as well. It kind of dragged on. The surgeon said I was good to go again, so I was back over to Europe and racing pretty quick. In a bit of pain, but I managed to push on through it and did 5 races until Fort William, where I just hit a hole and my arm bent. And then I ended up with essentially a broken arm that was plated, or like a bent arm that's got a plate holding the bend together. And I was in denial that it was damaged, even though it looked like a banana. I kept on racing the next week and qualified in Leogang as well, just gritting my teeth off every single drop and every time I had to pull up. But I managed to qualify for that race as well, and I finished the race in Fort William where it did bend. I didn't crash, I just hit a hole and braced, and it just went, yep. And then I end up with a bent arm, so not ideal, but these things happen in this sport. And so I'd had a broken arm, now I've got a bent arm, so then essentially back home to New Zealand, another surgery, a long recovery, and then I pretty much had to say to them, well, I can't really race, so what do we do? They still gave me my bike, so that was nice of them anyway. I didn't get the 12,000 euros, but I got 1,000, I think. So 1,000 was still something to take home. And then I got a brand new Evil bike, which I went home and sold. So that wasn't too bad, but I definitely didn't make much, still haven't made much money in my career. And I've been working away at it since 2008. I'm 3 years into it. And it's pretty tough. In the off seasons, I'll be working trail building to try and support my income, and I did some trail building contracts around the world. Worked in Portugal for 3 months, Chile for 3 months, and then in some stuff in New Zealand as well. So those jobs actually allowed me to save enough money to pay for a house deposit at the time, as well as pay for my racing, which looking back now was the best thing I ever did, was start investing early. Without that, I wouldn't be in a good position now. But yeah, I didn't actually make money from the sport yet. So 2012, I'd finally recovered from my arm injury. It really dragged on pretty much all of 2011 before I got back to 100%. I was back into it and riding pretty well, and then I pulled up for a jump, my handlebar snapped and I broke my scaphoid. So any mountain biker will know the scaphoid is one of the bones you don't want to break. It has a very small blood supply and it took a long time to recover. So that rode off that year again pretty much. I was riding for Argentina bike that year, which is Roberto Vanessa from San Romolo, a great guy from the Italian downhill scene. He was nice enough to still give me my bike, but I couldn't really do any races for him, which kind of sucked. I flew all the way to Europe and just traveled around and watched races, which at the time was pretty bad, but it gave me time to do some more Win TV and make my own videos, which I'd actually started already in 2009. I started making my own videos. After that first season, I came home and I was like, I've got to start making videos next year. So 2008, I got the idea. The first thing I did when I got home and saved some money was buy a laptop and a camera. And I started making my own Win TV videos, which then have grown to become what they are today, and also allowed me to have a lot longer career than if my race results were deciding that. And at the time, there wasn't really social media or anything, so that was the media you could do. So I was like, well, I better do it myself. And there were a lot of years where I was like, I'm doing this every year and not really getting anything for it. So eventually it does come around, but it wasn't yet. 2012, I didn't make any money. I paid for my flights to Europe and I got my bike for free. But shout out to Roberto Vanessa, because he didn't have to give me that bike and I didn't actually do any races for him. So yeah, top guy and a legend of the Italian scene. 2013, I was lucky enough to get the call from Mad Dog Boris. I think most people know he's a photographer in the industry, and he was still kind of starting out at the time. He was working in a German magazine, Mountain Bike Rider, and between him and the magazine, which was owned by Frank Wickett, they were starting a team with Bulls Bikes, which is a German mainstream bicycle company. Boris reached out and he heard that I was keen for any sort of ride, and then this was the first proper professional opportunity that I got in the sport. That first year I signed for 15,000 euros. Not a crazy amount now, but at the time that was like the dream for me. I was finally getting paid to be a mountain biker and getting all my bikes and stuff for free as well. So everything was looked after, all travel, everything was covered. I took home 15,000 euros and I had a pretty good year that first year. I think my highlight might have been 17th at the World Champs and a few other top 20 results, some good IXS results, and just a good year. First year in a team. It was quite hard, I remember, because it was the first year in a team, but you also, the team I was in mainly spoke German, so I'd quite often be hanging out by myself or just listening to everyone speaking German. But I had a good time and got through that year. They wanted to re-sign me after that. I was only on a 1-year contract, so I re-signed on, I think, a 3-year contract maybe, for 20,000 euros for 2014 and 15, 16, which was at the time the best thing ever for me. 20,000 euros a year in New Zealand dollars, it seems like a lot. I was young and I was happy with that, and I got all my bikes for free as well. Everything was looked after. They did a good job, and the bike was better than I realized at the time. We had some pretty good results in that 14 and 15. I think highlights, maybe I was 11th in Fort William World Cup 2015, and then I got 3rd at the Rotorua Enduro, World Enduro, and then a bunch of IXS races, podiums and so on. So pretty good times. and I was enjoying finally being a professional mountain biker. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not really a lot of money. It's just like your everyday low level job money, but it was good at the time. So yeah, during 2015 I got contacted by Steve Spencer, who was sports marketing for GT, and he discussed if I could join GT for the next year. I was still on a Bulls contract for 16, but I had to kind of make the decision what to do. And you feel like you're kind of going behind someone's back or so on. But the opportunity at GT was too much to say no to, because the scale of the team and the brand at the time. At the time, they had the Athertons as their riders. So to ride for GT was like a dream of mine anyway. Since I was a young kid, I watched GT movies. I grew up watching that. It was like the brand when I was young. So to ride for them, at least like everyone knows the brand. At the time I was riding for Bulls, I'd tell someone anywhere else in the world other than Germany that I ride for Bulls bikes. No one's heard of it. So that was kind of the big factor in the decision. And then it was a hard one to make, but in the end, end of 2015, I had to pay Bulls my 2016 salary back so that I could get out of that contract. So it cost me 20 grand to go to GT. But otherwise, I was going to stay at Bulls, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And then the other thing was, after I left, the team didn't run for the year anyway. So essentially, I lost 20 grand for nothing, really. But yeah, I paid them 20,000, and I got out of that contract, and it put me in a good position for 2016. 2016, I finally signed for GT Factory Racing. I was truly a professional mountain biker on a big team, and I'd essentially made it. That was my dream from when I was younger, and I'd finally achieved it. I just had to pay 20,000 to Bulls to get out of the previous contract, but luckily enough, with GT, I signed for 40,000 US dollars. So that was just half, and I figured, well, if I lose half and I still get the same money for the year and I can move to the bigger team, I don't want to miss that boat before it sails. So I took that option and moved to GT, and I think that was something that did springboard my career, even though I didn't have a very good first year. Had a few injuries that first season. I think I broke my wrist or my hand quite early on, and I didn't race as much as I'd have liked. Had some concussions in that first season. Struggled with the bike the first year, and I guess the team looked shinier than it was, like the products looked shinier than they were at the time. So I thought I was going to jump on this GT and it was going to be way better than my old bike. But essentially things were the other way around, and I really struggled to get used to the bike in those first couple seasons. Didn't have that many great results, and a lot of the riders in the team were just having big crashes quite regularly, which doesn't build the confidence. But we had a great time anyway. We had great teammates and a cool team with Brooke McDonald, Sam Dale, Martin Mays, Jackson Frew. It was a good laugh. So we were having a good time even if we weren't going well. And they really looked after us. We stayed in nice places, we ate well, everything went pretty nicely. On to 2017, I think my first contract with GT was a 2-year contract at 40,000. So after an average first year results wise, I was pretty motivated in 2017. Probably trained harder than I ever did, and came into the season pretty strong. I managed to win the first Enduro World Series in Rotorua, which was like my career highlight probably, I would say. And then also that helps springboard my contracts for the next years. And when it became time for negotiation, it was a bit easier because I'd had some good results. And I was performing on the world stage for the brand and doing a lot of content as well. I did always through these years, I was doing Win TV and also Wheelie Wednesday videos on social media, which I've been doing since 2014, I think, consistently. So all of these things helped my negotiations, and I think that next contract, I'm thinking it was, gonna have to find it. I'll have to go and have a look just to check. I'll get my laptop. Right. Eh? At the end of 2017, I managed to negotiate a new contract, and it was actually quite a good way of negotiation that I did. I aimed for a bonus heavy contract, so I think I had $40,000 of bonus US, but it was in media. So for my videos, I had like a view bonus, and I knew that I could reach those targets pretty easy. So I hit the cap within, before the season was finished in 2018, and would reach that 40,000. Whether I got an injury or not, I could still produce these videos, so it was like safe income. And that helped push the contract up, so 40,000 in bonus, and then I got a 65,000 base, so I was at 105 total. Normally the bonus is hard to reach because it's normally performance based, and there's no guarantees there because you could have an injury straight away. But with the media side, I knew that I could produce the content and reach these bonuses, so it worked out quite well, and that was a good way to negotiate the contract to make everyone feel like they win, and they're only paying me well if I perform in the videos anyway, so it worked out quite well. And that was my first like solid deal. That was like always a goal. I think I remember back then my goal was to make 100,000, and then that was finally ticking that box, which was quite cool. And like achieving that in the sport was quite good. Like a 6-figure deal was hard to find actually, and my results maybe didn't cover that, but I had some great videos and stuff that went quite viral at the time, which definitely would have helped. I was featured on those People Are Awesome videos, which was at the time quite a thing, and then just did all sorts of social clips and also all the Win TV, and I was performing on the track as well, so overall doing a bit of everything. All right, so 2020 I negotiated a new contract for 21. I had a base salary of 90,000 and a bonus of 30,000, which I could hit with media bonuses as well. And yeah, then I was pretty happy with my deal. I was 120 total US dollars this is, which is a good deal at the time. And GT always supported me really well with bikes as well. We got more than enough product. Some other brands a little tighter on product, and we also always stayed in really nice places. Shout out to Steve Spencer, coach, and Mark Morrison, who always looked after us over those years. Sometimes I thought some of the dinners and so on would be a little bit too much of a spend, but when it's not your money, you don't really have to worry about it. But if you're used to doing things how I was in those first years, this was quite a difference. So yeah, I was doing all right. I was on a good deal. And then, yeah, those were I think that contract ran through to 22. And then I think that was essentially the end of me racing for the factory team, and then transitioning to being like more I am the team rather than I ride for the factory team. So yeah, had a pretty good run through those years with the factory team. The one thing I will say is when you're in a factory team, you're limited to being only a rider for the team, and not like you represent all the sponsors of the team, but you don't work with them individually. So sometimes that can limit yours a little bit. If you're like myself and you do content and so on for each brand, then you're not really working with them directly, you're working for the team. It's also easier, but it's maybe when you do more things for some of those brands, you benefit less. But I was happy with my deal at the time, and it was a good deal. So yeah, thanks to GT for those good years in the factory team. Then we move on to 2023, where I made my transition from factory team rider to more of like a team manager in a way. Essentially it was my own team, the privateer project, and that's where that started, supporting privateers and helping out where I could. I was still pitting with the team, but then organising a lot of things myself and managing to pay for certain things myself, so on and so forth. So for that year, I think I was on 115 from the frame only, I think. And then I managed all the other sponsorships myself, but then I also had to pay more costs, so it all added up. But it was a interesting transition. It's a lot more work to do that, but then you have a lot more direct contact with all of your sponsors, which is quite nice, and I really enjoy that from that side. So yeah, working together closer with sponsors is quite nice after many years of being in the factory team. But if you're an all-out racer, I would recommend being in the factory team, because all you do is race your bike, and then the rest of it you just forget about and focus on racing your bike, which is quite nice. But I like to work with the people and work together, and that's the good side to running a program. So that was then running a program for the next couple of years, and then it kind of brings me to where I am today. GT finished, unfortunately, in the middle of 2025, and that was the end of it. So yeah, it was a privilege and a pleasure to be part of the brand for 10 years. Not many riders can say they ride for one brand for 10 years, but also allows me to make this video, because a lot of this stuff is normally meant to be kept confidential, but I like to be able to come out and say this, because no one really ever has any idea, and you're just guessing numbers rather than actually knowing what someone did. So it's quite cool to be able to actually say what I did in my career, and for young guys or even anyone, it's interesting to know the numbers and see what people really make in the sport. Without knowing, you can't really guess. So yeah, that's why I've done the video, and yeah, I hope you enjoy, and maybe we can dig into some other videos in future of like how the finances in the sport work and how people get paid, because it's quite an interesting topic, and it's not something that's often talked about. So yeah, I think the more it was talked about, or is able to be talked about, maybe the more people will make, or the more level the salaries would be. So yeah, hopefully that was my goal with the video, and I hope you've learned something. So yeah, cheers.